Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. I'm Miss Rai. Before we start, I'm gonna say one thing. If I'm going too fast for you, great thing about a recorded video is that you can just rewind and watch stuff over and over again if it's confusing. Hopefully, it will become less confusing and you're even allowed to fast forward through the bits that you already know. With that in mind, let's get started, shall we? The living world is wondrously varied. How do biologists make sense of this diversity and also complexity? This opening chapter sets up a framework for answering this question. The first part of the chapter provides a panoramic view of the biological landscape, involving the definition of life. We then focus on several branches of biology, among many others that we have today. Next, we look at characteristics of life, organized around some unifying themes. Finally, we address the study of life on Earth, which extends from the microscopic scale of molecules and cells that make up organisms to the global scale of the entire living planet. Biology, like any other discipline, studies one particular aspect, and for us, as far as the physical sciences go, biology is essentially the study of life. If you have physics, you're studying the laws and such that govern how all matter and energy work in the universe. If you're looking at chemistry, you're gonna study the interactions between atoms and things of that sort. But life deals with essentially what is common amongst all living things. And so, when we study life, it's one of those things that doesn't quite have an easy definition. We all intuitively know what is alive and what is not. Even a child realizes that a dog or a plant is alive, while a rock or a car is not. Yet, the phenomenon we call life defies a simple one-sentence definition. We recognize life by what living things do. Chapter 1.3 highlights some of the properties and processes we associate with life. While limited to a handful of images, Chapter 1.3 reminds us that living organism or living world is wondrously varied. Life is diversified into many forms as living things found on planet Earth. It comprises of the same chemical elements that make up the non-living things, and they obey the same laws of physics and chemistry as non-living things do. The word biology originates from Greek words. Bios is life and logos is study. Biology is defined as the scientific study of life or the study of living things. Although biologists know a great deal about life on Earth, many mysteries remain. Posing questions about the living world and seeking answers through scientific inquiry are the central activities of biology. Biologists questions the biologist's questions can be ambitious. They may ask how a single tiny cell becomes a tree or a dog, how the human mind works, or how the different forms of life in a forest interact. When questions occur to you as you observe the natural world, you are thinking like a biologist. More than anything else, biology is a quest and ongoing inquiry about the nature of life. So if I were to pass around a rock and a rabbit, everyone would agree saying that a rabbit is a living thing and a rock wouldn't be alive and whatnot. So how do we intuitively know that these things are alive or will never live? What is life? That's the question. We're still in that kind of gray area. We can say some things are alive, but there are 10 million species on this planet alone, and there's more than likely life elsewhere in our universe. It'd be ridiculous to think that there wasn't. So the big question is really, how, if you want to succinctly say, even to a child, why is this rock not alive and this rabbit is alive? Living things move around and they kind of intuitively know that. But sometimes things aren't so obvious as far as what's alive and what's not. For example, when you get into zombies, they do kind of all the things that living things do. Technically, they're dead. This may seem like a silly example, but there's still a debate today when it comes to things like viruses, for example. Some scientists would argue that a virus is technically a living organism, and there are others that would say no, a virus is not alive. So how do we draw that line? Because a virus exhibits all of the characteristics that a living organism does, which is why there's still this debate today as far as where you draw that line. So the solution is as follows. So far, most scientists can agree upon a particular definition of life, despite the fact that there are millions of species of organisms on our planet and millions more that have lived before on our planet that are now extinct. They all share one common feature characteristic, and that's where we get to cell theory, and that is that all living things are made of cells. That is probably one of the most succinct definitions of life, is that a living organism, whether it's a single cell, which we call unicellular, or whether it's made up of trillions of cells like you and I, which we would call multicellular. There's a couple of ways for describing cell theory. The first one is the cell theory, the theory that all living things are made of cells. Another way of saying this is that the smallest unit of life is cell. In fact, if you were to take cells from your skin and put them in the right environment, they would continue to grow and live even though you remove them from your body. So cell kind of one of the most basic units that can function independently if given the right environment. They're self-sustaining structures that can replicate and propagate or reproduce essentially. Another way of describing cell theory is that all cells come from pre-existing cells. Basically, cells make more of themselves. Now, this is not the same concept of evolution. This is not the concept that all living things came from single cells in the beginning, so to speak. That is not what cell theory is. So, one more concept that you could say is that the most basic level of organization of life is the cell. Those are just a couple of different ways of looking at how to describe the cell theory, but we all encompass the same thing. That's why a rock is not a living organism, because it's not made with cells. That's why there's this debate in viruses, because viruses is not included in cell theory. Viruses are not cell-contained structures that we call cells. So we're going to look at the organization of cell later on in chapter 5, where we look at how a cell is structured. Biology is the study of life and living organisms. It is a broad field including many branches and subdisciplines which is where we come to subtopic 1.2. The current research trend in biology is stem cell research. After several decades of experiments, stem cell therapy is becoming a magnificent game changer for medicine. With each experiment, the capabilities of stem cells are growing, although there are still many obstacles to overcome. Regardless, the influence of stem cell in regenerative medicine and transplantology is immense. Currently, untreatable neurodegenerative diseases have the possibility of becoming treatable with stem cell therapy. Other than stem cell research, biologists study structure, function, growth, evolution, distribution, identification, and also taxonomy. Below are the main branches of study included in this field. Botany is the scientific study of plants. It includes the study of their structure, how they grow, how they can be effectively classified, the things that impact their development, and so on. Zoology is the branch of biology that studies the animal kingdom, including their structure, embryology, evolution, classification, habits, and distribution of all animals, both living and extinct, and how they interact with ecosystems. Ecology is the study of the relationships between living organisms, including humans, and their physical environment. It seeks to understand the vital connections between plants and animals and the world around them. Genetics is the study of heredity. Heredity is a biological process where a parent passes certain genes onto their children or offspring. Every child inherits genes from both of their biological parents, and these genes in turn express specific traits. Microbiology is the study of microscopic organisms such as bacteria, viruses, archaea, fungi, and also protozoa. This discipline includes fundamental research on the biochemistry, physiology, cell biology, ecology, evolution, and clinical aspects of microorganisms, including the host response to these agents. Biotechnology is the use of biological systems found in organisms or the use of the living organisms themselves to make technological advances and adapt those technologies to various fields. These include application in multiple fields from agriculture practice to the medical sector. Biochemistry is the branch of science that explores the chemical processes within and related to living organisms. It is a laboratory-based science that brings together biology and also chemistry. Cell biology is the study of cell structure and function, and it revolves around the concept that the cell is the fundamental units of life. Focusing on the cell permits a detailed understanding of the tissue and organisms that cell compose. Biology is the subject of enormous scope, and exciting new biological discoveries are being made every day. How can you organize into a comprehensible framework all the information you encounter as you study the broad range of topics included in biology? Focusing on a few big ideas will help. Here are 5 unifying themes, way of thinking about life that will still hold true decades from now. In this section, we'll divide the major themes into 12 characteristics that living organisms have, which includes feed, evolve, respire, response to surrounding, excrete waste, reproduce, organize structure, grow and develop, compose of cells, locomotion, adaptation to environment, and also homeostasis. So these 12 characteristics of life has the mnemonics that I recommend to use in order for you to remember all of this, which is Ferrero, Great Chocolate La. So the bold words are the first word of the characteristics. First, all organisms are able to feed themselves. For example, plants make their food from using energy from sunlight through the process of photosynthesis. Animals eat other animals to get nutrients and also energy. For example, lion eats a deer. Next, organisms evolve where they undergo changes over time to survive better in the environment. For example, anteater develop sticky tongues to catch insects. And then the next example is the theory of human evolving from apes. Through the process of cellular respiration, the energy in food is converted into energy that can be used by the body cell. During cellular respiration, glucose and oxygen are converted into carbon dioxide and water, and the energy is transferred to ATP. Living organisms respond to the environment. Anything in the environment that causes a change is called a stimulus. For example, organisms react to many stimuli, including light, temperature, odor, sound, gravity, heat, water, and also pressure. Here, you can see that the plant responds to water and also light sources. Every living thing makes waste, or material that the body no longer needs or cannot use. Animals excrete liquid waste as urine through kidneys or through sweat glands as sweat. Plants can get rid of excess water by transpiration and also the process of guttation. Reproduction is the process by which living things replicate themselves. Sexual reproduction is the production of a new organism from two parents. Asexual reproduction is the production of a new organism from a single parent. Organisms reproduce asexually by splitting, budding, vegetative propagation, and the development of eggs into new animals without fertilization. Biological levels of organization of living things range from the simplest to the most complex are organelle, organelle, cells, tissue, organs, organ systems, organisms, population, communities, ecosystem, and also biosphere. For example, the organismal level of biology here shown in the example is organisms are made out of cell, which the cell will make a few of the same cell will make tissue, and that tissue will form organ. Several organ will form organ system, and several organ system will form an organism. During growth, most living things go through a cycle of change called development. Living things obtain energy from the environment and use that energy to grow, develop, and reproduce. All organisms require energy to build the substances that make up their cells. Living organisms are made up of one or more cells, which is the basic unit of life. Unicellular organisms are made up of only one cell that carries out all of the functions needed by the organism, while multicellular organisms use many different types of cells to function. Locomotion is the ability of organisms to move and propel itself from place to place in order to find food, shelter, or move away from danger. For example, bacteria uses flagella for movement, and amoeba use pseudopods to move. Living organisms are adapted to their environment. This means that the way they look, the way they behave, how they are built, or their way of life makes them suited to survive and reproduce in their habitat. A chameleon changes its color to hide from predators. Another example is a cactus adapts in the dry and hot desert, which the cactus has long roots to help it search water inside the soil and has prickly leaves to reduce being eaten by animals. All living organisms, from plants to puppies to people, must regulate their internal environment to process energy and ultimately survive. Humans sweat to cool off, or we call it to lower their body temperature during hot days. Another example is glucose level in human are maintained by secreting insulin and also glycogen. Insulin are secreted when the glucose level is high, and glycogen is secreted when the glucose level is low. So that's it for our first session, where we managed to cover from subchapter 1.1 until 1.3. All of the lecture notes were referred from our main reference, which is the book written by Yuri et al. 2017, titled Essential Biology 11th edition. This is your assignment for week 1, in which you have to submit in our Google Classroom. Now, as a reminder to everyone, this should be your motto for the next 14 weeks. Set it as your wallpaper and screensaver. You don't want to look back and know they could have done better. Get your priorities straight, because pain is temporary. It will eventually subside, however long it may take. But remember, moderation is the key. That little number could determine a lot, but it doesn't determine your worth as a person or your state of mind. Don't let your GPA dictate your personal health. Your GPA may be on a piece of paper forever, but you have your mind with you forever. Don't lose it over histology of cell and tissue. That's it for first class. See you next week. Bye.